Welcome back to the channel. I discovered something. Maybe this is well known. Maybe it isn't. But I discovered something that I feel like makes a little bit more sense out of some of the stuff we're seeing on the streets during Pride Month and the transsexual stuff and things like that. I mean, obviously, there's really no making sense of that. But I feel like I understand it a little bit more than I used to. And actually, there's some things that I've witnessed in my own life and in movies and in things like that I never quite understood, but I feel like I get it now. So if you don't know this, I lived for, I don't know, 8 to 10 years or so, maybe something like that in New York City. And I'll never forget this one friend I had, and this guy, he was always very much into drugs. He's also very much into fashion. He was heterosexual as far as I knew, but you could see some of the stuff that he would like. I could see how someone might say, maybe it is ambiguous as sexuality. Anyway, I remember one time there was a girl visiting him that was, kind of like the kind of girl that would go to raves and stuff like that. I remember one time they were, not right in the head, if you know what I mean. And they looked at me and they were like, "We are the candy kids." And I didn't understand what they meant by that. I didn't ask because I was a little bit creeped out by it. That was it. I never really looked into it again. I never asked him about it. This is someone I used to hang out with every now and then. I never understood what he meant by that. He also was the kind of guy that would sometimes just like dress up in very weird outfits when we went out, and even sometimes they even wear like costumes and things like that. I never quite understood what that was all about, but again, I thought it was pretty funny, but I never really got into it. And then there was a couple of movies that I saw some things that didn't make sense either. Like there's a movie that I used to watch called American Psycho. I don't watch it anymore. It's pure debauchery. But in that movie, there's some club scenes where he's in a club and people are like, again, they're like wearing costumes, and I don't think it's a Halloween party. They're just like wearing these like flamboyant costumes, and he doesn't like these people very much in the movie. He's kind of like a yuppie, and then but he's at these clubs with all these people that are dressed up like freaks. And then there was also a scene in the movie Kids, which is it's another creepy, just kind of a strange movie. I would not watch it these days, but I used to watch it every now and then back in the day. Very disturbing, about young kids, like 14 to 16-year-olds, and they would go to clubs in New York City, and I always thought that seemed so outrageous. Like you can't get into a club when you're 14 years old, like. At least, because that's what I knew of New York City. When I was there, I was already, in my 20s, and very, very relatively strict about who gets into the clubs and bars and stuff like that and things like that. I always thought that was outrageous. And then I heard about, I don't even know how this came up, but I watched a video about this movie, Party Monster. Have you seen this movie? I don't think it's a movie that you'll want to watch. It's about Macaulay Culkin's in it, Seth Green is in it, Marilyn Manson is in it. I don't really know who's who, what's what in the movie, but it's about a real life guy who was like a club promoter in the 90s, and he was he was homosexual, and all his friends were like homosexuals, and they would dress up. They would dress up in these weird outfits. Like here's an example of the kind of thing that they would do. Here's a guy who's just kind of weird. He's wearing goggles. That's just kind of strange. This is the guy, the main character, Michael, I think is his name. Michael Aleg. He's dead now. He overdosed on something. But this is Macaulay Culkin. This is how he would go out. Like this is what he would do. Not on Halloween, just like all the time. This guy was part of their crew. He would wear his chicken costume, and then there was this guy who would had goggles. Kind of like a captain's hat, and he would wear these angel wings. And actually, this guy, the whole story here is this guy in real life. This guy killed this guy one day in a drug frenzy, and this is a story about this like movement of weirdos that would dress up, and it was like they were all kind of gay or ambiguous, and they would dress up like women, and they would have flamboyant, makeup and stuff like that. And some of it was just outright insane, but some of it was like they're trying to look like a girl. I mean, it was dressing in drag and just dressing outrageous and having like, and sometimes they'd have horns and like, devil stuff, like some of the stuff that we see today on Twitter feeds and stuff like that. And it certainly seems like what was happening back then in the 90s in the clubs is kind of what they're trying to push just in general life out here, where you've got, transsexual story hour, but it's like not like just a guy dressed as a woman. It's like a guy dressed as like a demonic woman with like, weirdo eyes and fangs and horns and stuff. That's the kind of stuff that these guys would do when they went clubbing, nightclubs in the 90s. And this was back when New York was really seedy. Like, if you go to New York now, a lot of people think New York is still seedy. But I got to be honest with you, there were certain parts of New York that were pretty, creepy and weird. But a lot of New York is very commercialized, very, I'm going to say clean, but like that's a relative term, of course. There's still garbage in the streets, of course. But it's just more of it. It's more like going to Disney World than it is going to, like a seedy place with like peep shows and, prostitutes on every corner kind of thing. Like the prostitution is still there, but it's hidden, right? A lot of the seedier elements of New York, they're kind of hidden and stuff like that. Back when these guys were roaming the streets, they're freaks. These people are freaks, and they were all drug addicted and stuff like that. Back when they were going out in the streets, like you could go to Times Square and, you might be the only one there. Like it wasn't like it is now where you go there, there's 100,000 people in Times Square. It's not like that back in the 90s. In the 90s, it was a very seedy kind of place, a very shady kind of place. Lots of drugs everywhere. You walk around, you step on a vial of crack, that kind of thing. Needles, stuff like that. That's not how New York is anymore. And there's a very specific reason why New York is not like that anymore. And you might think that New York is degenerate and awful and still kind of like that, relatively speaking. And relatively speaking, you're right. But compared to the 90s, New York is a much safer place than it used to be. It's just a fact. And there's a reason for that. But this is something that I just think this is so interesting. And maybe you don't care about this, But back in the day, like the people that used to do this, in fact, the guy who wrote this book is a guy named James St. James, who's a transsexual, or a transvestite, I should say, because there's really no such thing as a transsexual. James St. James, he's a transvestite. At the time, he described this as, this is like, we were kind of dressing in drag, we were kind of just dressing up for fun, but it was all also intentionally infantile. Like we were being intentionally childish. That's what we were doing. And if you look at of course this is childish. This is how people like kids might dress up. Like except for this one, no kid of mine would ever dress up like this. But kids might want to dress up in a chicken costume and jump around funny or wear goggles for no reason or something like that. So they knew that this was childish. Like they knew this wasn't like. It was legitimate to them in some way, but they knew it was kind of illegitimate. It was a counterculture, right? Like they knew that, and it is illegitimate. It's not what an adult human should be doing with their time. They knew that at the time, and now it's being sold as if that this is legitimate. Like this is actually something that's normal in normal life. No, this is something that needs to be in the back alley and only there, and eventually not even there. Like people that want to dress up like this and be freaks like this need to understand that they're not being legitimate. They're being infantile. They need to hide this. This is not something that they should tell anybody about. This is a shameful thing. And now, of course, these people weren't ashamed of it. They were going out and stuff like that, but they would only go out really at night doing this kind of stuff. Like this wasn't to be at the public library. They knew their place wasn't the public library. They knew that. If they went there, they knew that they would probably be arrested for indecency and probably be frisked to see if they had any drugs on them, which they always did, right? They were on drugs. But this is the thing. Like they knew at the time this was infantile. And the thing is, here's what I want to say. They know this now. They know this now. And I think for a lot of these freaks, and these are freaks, people that dress up like this and try to push it off as normal, They're freaks. You know what I mean? And they're made in the image of God, and so of course we don't treat them outside of the law of God or stuff like that. But one of the most loving things you can do to these people is to not placate them, to not let them, not indulge their fantasy that this is normal behavior. This is not normal behavior. This is behavior that they should be ashamed of, and that feeling of shame is a very good thing. If they're feeling shame, they should feel shame, and they should hide this, and they should not do this, of course, number one. They should repent of this kind of thing. But this is shameful. This is shameful. And back in the day, yes, they were going out in public, but they would only go out at night, and they would only go out in their little clubs and things like that. And this was not something for normal life. Now, of course, it became a spectacle in New York, and they used to go on talk shows and stuff like that. And they became, they essentially became professional freaks that people would gawk at and things like that. Like, that's what they did. And so, of course, they were trying to sort of mainstream it to some degree, but it was still mostly just a spectacle. Like, it was like a money-making scheme for them. They knew it wasn't legitimate. This is not a normal thing to do. Very strange. Very strange. And back then, it was something that kids would do. They used to call themselves the club kids, and they really were kids. I mean, they were young kids. And this was something that was somewhat tolerated in clubs. Like, you could be 16 and go to a nightclub dressed like a freak and, do drugs and all kinds of degeneracy. I mean, I'll let you kind of figure out what I mean by that. And it was relatively tolerated until, quite frankly, Rudy Giuliani. Rudy Giuliani, among other things, Rudy Giuliani, I mean, he set out to clean up New York, right? And you might have some things to gripe with about Rudy Giuliani's tactics or his style, or even like everything that he did. And obviously, I'm not endorsing everything Rudy Giuliani did, but Rudy Giuliani set out to clean up the city, and clean up the city he did. And I'm not talking just about the club kids, but although he did end this, I mean, this came to an end in large part due to Rudy Giuliani. There's just no question about it. He said, you know what? This is degeneracy. There's rampant drug use. This is complete open degeneracy. We're going to put this to an end. Simple as that. And he did it. He went out and he cracked skulls and he did it. Did the same thing with the mafia. It was the same thing with the mafia. That was degeneracy too, a different kind of degeneracy. But he's like, we're going to put a stop to this. Rudy Giuliani should get a lot of credit for improving New York City, and he definitely improved New York City. When I lived in New York City, there were still lots of problems, and it was definitely a socialist kind of paradise at the time. Well, not quite a paradise, but it was still pretty socialist. But because of the work of Rudy Giuliani, can you imagine a guy like Rudy Giuliani taking the reins of New York City? I mean, the guy. Listen, he wasn't perfect. I'm not singing the praises of Rudy Giuliani in toto, right? But he cracked some skulls. That was a man who knew how to use power, and he used power, and in many ways, he really cleaned up a lot of things. Some would say he hid them, which I think. That's a start. You got to start somewhere. Eventually, here's the thing. Like, there's nothing wrong with pushing back the darkness from the light, right? So saying if you're going to do degeneracy, you're going to do it in the back alleys, right? That's a start. That's a good start. So the degeneracy is still there, but it's hidden. It's something that's shameful. People know it's shameful. They hide it from you. They're not open about it anymore. Obviously, it can't stay there, though. We got to clean up the back alleys too, right? But that's a guy who knew how to use power. And I got to be honest with you. As Christians, we need to embrace that. We really do. We need to embrace that. There are so many examples of, so many. There are good examples, I'll say that, of men, good Christian, zealous for the Lord kind of men in Old Testament that knew how to use power. And if there were, loser Big Eva types and loser like pietist types back then, I'm sure there were. They would say, "Oh, this is not the way of Christ. This is not the way we don't. That's unbiblical." And it's like, well, yeah. I mean, you could say to Nehemiah all day long that's unbiblical, but at the end of the day, Nehemiah got results, and the Lord commended him for it. The Lord remembered him for it, as he asked. I mean, Nehemiah made no bones about it. He told the Lord, remember me for this work that I did for you. And I could just see it now, those pietistic, getting their holy robes on. That is not the way. We must spurn power. We must have it. This must be good news for the secularists too. Like, it's just. What about the Hindus? What are they gonna say if we like that kind of thing? We really need to work on this one. I mean, I'm not the guy to do it. I'm not an academic. I'm not that kind of guy, right? I'm more of a like big picture kind of guy. More of a, I'm going to move the Overton window kind of guy. But one thing is for certain, like, Christians need to learn how to use power. We need to get power and learn how to use power. Obviously, I'm not saying that people are going to be converted due to your power. So don't get all stupid on me, because I can see some of you getting stupid on me and saying, oh, power's more important than the gospel to you. No, that's obviously not what I'm saying. Obviously, the gospel is how you change hearts, but Christians need to learn how to clean up the freaking streets as well. You see what I'm saying? The church is there to preach the gospel and to change hearts. But Christians need to learn how to clean up the freaking streets as well for all of the degenerates that refuse the call of the gospel. That doesn't mean that they refuse it permanently, but I'm saying as long as they're going to continue to do this kind of thing, we need to get some people with sort of the shrewdness of Giuliani in the 90s to clean up the streets in a Christian way. That's something that is legitimate, that we need to put more work and effort into, that we need to figure out how to do. We need people like Nehemiah that are willing to crack a few skulls, metaphorically speaking, allegedly, for the Lord. For the Lord. I don't know how else to say it, so I'm just going to leave it there. God bless you. I hope you found this video helpful. By the way, don't go out there and start watching Party Monster. I don't know. It sounds like that movie would have a lot of degeneracy in it. Well, I'm not going to say probably. I would not recommend you watching it because I've read a little bit about it, and even reading it made me feel like I needed to take a shower kind of thing. But this transsexual stuff that we're seeing during Pride Month, this is stuff that has happened before. It's happened before in dark alleys of New York City. Even in the dark alleys of New York, even when New York itself was an entire dark alley. Even then, they still kind of hid in the dark alleys. This is something that's happened before. It's been put to an end before by Giuliani. And it can be put to an end again by someone who can wield power better than Giuliani, more godly, more zealously for the Lord than Giuliani. If Giuliani can clean up the streets of New York, doing it for whatever reasons he was doing it, those of us who are doing it for the Lord can do it that much better. I don't really know how else to say it. I hope you found this video helpful. God bless.